FEMA requires that we have. One of which is the LEPC, the Local Emergency Planning Committee. One is THIRA, Threat Hazard Risk Identification Assessment Study. One is hazard mitigation. And one is a recovery committee meeting, which includes VOAD and LTRC. And so what we've done is combine all those meetings together so we have them to a year. And if you remember, those of you who were with us at the last meeting, we decided that rather than having, what we're doing was having all 4 of those sign-in sheets and signing in at one time. What we've done is we have just combined the committees. This is now the DeKalb County, the DeKalb County All Hazards Planning Committee. Okay, so we plan for everything. We plan for all 5 mission areas that FEMA looks at: prevention, protection, mitigation, response, and recovery is all covered under this meeting. And so what we do here is we have discussions about all of those mission areas. We right now one of the missions that we have currently ongoing right now is the recovery mission that's going on from the tornado of November 30th. So currently that mission is ongoing with the status currently being with the LTRC, and Mr. Hall is the LTRC chairman. And they have just started actively meeting with that. Now keep in mind, this is also our annual VOAD meeting where we meet if nothing's going on. I believe most of the VOAD business has been done because, keep in mind, for those of you who don't really understand the difference, VOAD, Volunteer Organizations Active in Disaster, that is the response function of volunteers. Okay, so if you're a volunteer agency and you're active in disaster, you belong to VOAD. LTRC, Long-Term Recovery Committee, LTRC is the recovery piece of that. And so what we do is, for example, Red Cross has both a response mission and a recovery mission. So some groups, some volunteer groups may work with VOAD on a response basis. They actually send people out into the wind and rain, and like the Southern Baptists have a chainsaw team that works in response. But then again, the Baptists also do have mission workers come in after the storm and help do recovery. So that's the LTRC portion of the same group, and that's how it works. So that's why that's important. Again, because most of that stuff is being handled in those individual committee meetings. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that because when it comes, we've got a couple of things I do want to give you, those of you who want it. This is the new recovery plan. DeKalb County, this is the plan that we have just completed that includes all of that information. So if anybody wants to overlook that plan, and again, we didn't know exactly how many to plan for, so there may not be enough. I can email it to you. If your email is on the sign-in sheet, just mark it, put an asterisk, something beside it, and I'll be happy to email that plan to you. The other plan that was completed was the THIRA update. Now, what THIRA is threat hazard identification risk assessment. All right? What this is a plan that identifies what we have found to be threats to our location. Now, the difference between hazard mitigations, if you remember last July's meeting, we talked about the newly approved hazard mitigation plan. Now, hazard mitigation plan is a plan that talks about all of the natural hazards that we face and how we can mitigate for that. So let's say that we found that our community was particularly susceptible to flood, and we wanted to have a plan where we could apply for mitigation grant funding to help us do, say, a land buyout to where this repetitive flooding, we could turn that into a greenway and help mitigate that flooding. Or if we are particularly prone to tornadoes, that our community would want to build community storm shelters to mitigate against those tornadoes. So that's the hazard mitigation plan. THIRA differs only from the standpoint that it takes into account man-made hazards. All right, so for example, hazardous materials. We've got a railroad, we've got an interstate, we've got 5 major state highways in the county. So the possibility of us having a hazardous material spill could be great. And so you see that reflected in the THIRA. We take into account things like, not that we're real high up on the list of terrorism targets, but it's certainly not impossible that we could see what's now labeled as domestic terrorism, which we used to, call mischief. You could see somebody, somebody shooting at a substation with a rifle. You could see somebody shooting at a radio tower with a shotgun. Those are the kind of threats that we worry about when it comes to man-made hazards, more than just tornadoes and floods and ice storms. So THIRA takes all that into account. And the way the process works is that we have these meetings, which is your opportunity as community leaders to put into our planning cycle. Now what I mean by that is you look at these plans, you review these plans, you look and see if there are additional threats and hazards that you believe are in your community that we have not accounted for, and let us know that, so because this has to be updated every year. And we review this every year. This is the second written THIRA you have seen. We did this 2 years ago, and what we do is we review it every year, and then we republish it. We actually make a copy to send to the state every other year. We do this with hazard mitigation plans, but hazard mitigation is done every 5 years. THIRA has to be done every 2 years. Emergency operations plan. If you'll remember, we reviewed the emergency operations plan back in the summer, and so for 2016, we have the emergency operations plan, and so we have the new written copy of that. I have not had it signed off by the elected officials. You have not seen the emergency operations plan 2016 version because I was waiting on the new elected officials to get in place before we asked them for ratification. That way we wouldn't have to come back and do it again. And so we are beginning our process of sending those out for ratification by the cities. So you're going to be seeing that. And then of course we got to there are no major changes in the emergency operations plan. It looks just same format, everything as the old one was. The only thing that has really been changed is we changed around some phone numbers and some names of positions. We've had some elected officials change, and so we changed that. So it's really just more of an update than it is a change. But, so now we get down to the good stuff. The real reason, what you really want to know about, is this plan. This one is one we've been working on for about 2 years. And it's not really a plan. This is a hazardous materials commodity flow study. What we've done is we have looked at all of the transportation systems in the county, the interstate, railroad, and major state highways, and we have analyzed that data and have come up with some conclusions about planning and assessment that we find rather interesting. If you will look over on page 18. It begins the data analysis. And something that we found very interesting when we looked at this, what you see here is actually the information. This is raw data that we got from Norfolk Southern. This is actual hazard data of what flows through our county. All right? In a year, our number one transported hazardous material, they transported 5,920 train car loads of propane through the county. Right? Now that's 30,000 gallons per tank car. But when you begin to look at it, the most notable, of page 18, the most notable hazardous material released in DeKalb County was in 2002, and it was a sulfuric acid leak. This data comes from the shipping year 2012. That is the most current data that Norfolk Southern would give us. But the top 5 include petroleum gases, sodium hydroxide, ethylene oxide, hexamethylene. I practiced this. Hexamethylene. Yes. I practiced. I'm sorry. I tried. And hydrochloric acid. When you begin to look at these, this data, again, when you look at page 20, this is what we actually saw when we actually put people out on the railroad and counted placards. This is what we actually saw come through in 2016, which correlates with the information that they had given us. You know, and you start looking at it, and one of the things that I found extremely interesting was, if you look over on page 25. Page 25. The number of hazardous material loads observed per hour. Right? Fort Payne has 1.5 hazardous material loads per hour coming through our fair city. Henniger has 1.7, Crossville has 1.7, and Rainsville has 5.2. And we began to, when we looked at the data, and of course, you know, Mark Twain said there's 3 kinds of lies: lies, damn lies, and statistics. Okay? We began to look at this as statistical data, and we started looking at why is Rainsville suddenly, we've got a railroad in Fort Payne at 1.7 per hour, but we got Rainsville that has 5.2 per hour. And we began to look at the data and try to figure out what the correlation was. And what we realized is that we had collected data at the intersection of Highway 11 and 35, beside the railroad tracks. We were doing it at one time. What we did not account for was the hazardous materials that comes off the interstate and crosses the mountain, mixed with the hazardous material running up and down in 75. Which means Rainsville actually, when you combine 35 and 75's activity, you wind up with a much higher statistic than you would. So what we are going to do as a follow-up will be to go back And what we believe we're going to find if we go to Highway 35 and I-59 and do the same, that we believe that we're going to find out with the statistical data, is that we're going to bring those numbers a little closer together. But I found that extremely interesting when you start looking at hazardous materials. The thing about it is, on almost all of it, almost all our hazardous materials, our big stuff, the big loads that come through are petroleum distillates and gases. We got a lot of gasoline, a lot of diesel fuel runs through here. Train-wise, it's that big hit of propane and petroleum gases, because if you look, petroleum crude oil, petroleum gases, and propane account for a huge number. And that includes Balkan crude that does come through Fort Payne. And if you know what Balkan crude is, it's the highly explosive stuff like blew up in Aliceville. Same stuff runs right through Fort Payne every day. And a lot of folks say, well, what does this have to do with us? What it has to do with us is the fact that if you take an equivalent explosion of what happened in Aliceville, and it would completely devastate the city of Fort Payne. There'd be nothing left here. Again, you can go look at the Balkan crude train derailment in Canada, in Vancouver in 2014. I believe that's the right year. Was it 14? Killed 400 people, leveled the town about the size of Fort Payne. Killed 400 people. Now there again, you don't think much about it, but you kind of, it's not something that the railroad's real happy about us spreading the word about. You start looking at incidences like Graniteville. When was Graniteville, South Carolina? Was 2009. The Graniteville, South Carolina, it's a town about the size of Fort Payne, and it has a side rail much like ours is here, where the trains cross each other. One pulls over while the other one is coming the other way. But what happened in Graniteville was that the train had pulled in and stopped. The other train was coming along, and they did not switch the rail back. And so what happened is the trains ran head-on into each other, resulting in a chlorine gas release that killed about 60 people. And there again, Graniteville, South Carolina, is about the size of Fort Payne. And it's a very similar system. What we want to happen is our plan is to do with this study is that this now gives us the ammunition we need to go and begin to have a discussion with the railroad, with the federal government, with federal Department of Transportation and state DOT, along with county and city officials, and hopefully this will result in being able to get us a viaduct so that we can have at least have some access across the railroad if something does happen. Unfortunately, that is one of our big hazards, is the fact that we don't have any way to get from one side of the railroad to the other. Now, particularly when you look at our vulnerable situation, that's the reason you look at the EPCRA, okay? Because you've got to take this information and put it in context. So you look at the threat hazard and you say, okay, we've got Collinsville, and you look at how far Collinsville School is from the railroad. Now, if you notice, Collinsville School sits between the railroad and the interstate. You've got the railroad on one side and the interstate on the other, so they're getting it from either direction, which is, as is most all of Fort Payne. Valley Head's in the same place. Again, we look at our school system. Mr. Cunningham, all of the school system sits right on the railroad track. And again, Fort Payne is a valley. I don't know if there's anything you could do about that. And even if they didn't sit right beside the railroad, it's going to be within the hazardous material zone anyway. I mean, there's not a whole lot anybody in Fort Payne can do to mitigate that fact that it is a valley with a railroad track and an interstate running through it. What we have to mitigate is, what we have to do is to make sure that our planning documents, that number one, we have correctly identified the threats, that we know what our threat is, and that we have truly assessed that threat, And then number two, look at our planning documents, which is the emergency operations plan, and then we have a good plan in place so that if bad things do happen, we can take positive steps toward that. If we don't have a good plan, then we need to change the plan. All right, and so this involves the whole community, not just responders, not just police, fire, EMS. This is something that's going to involve all the responders and all of the citizens all put together. Now, you say, but what does that have to do, with us? We live at Geraldine or Crossville or, every community, I believe I'm right here, every incorporated municipality has a state highway running through it. There is no incorporated city in the county that does not have a state highway running through it. And almost all of them have major state highway intersections in it. Okay, so in other words, we're looking at Geraldine, we've got 227 and 75 coming together. So you've got traffic coming off of both sides. In Crossville, we've got 68 and 227 coming together. In Valley Head, we've got 117 and 11 coming together. So it's either a state highway or a U.S. highway coming together. Even Mentone, you got Alabama Highway 117 running through it. So all of the municipalities are involved in this because, again, when you look at it, if you think, well, we're talking about the rural part of the county. Well, let's take Mentone for example. In the summertime, we have a transient population of about 3,500 people. Okay, we did this year. We looked at how many campers, how many people come to summer camp in Mentone, Alabama. And the answer to that is there's about 3,000 kids who move in and out of Mentone every week. We get a new crowd every week from May until August, basically. And then we have about 500 support staff that stay there through the summer. So now what does that do? What that does, it makes Mentone the third largest city in the county. If you think about it in those kind of terms. I mean, you've got Fort Payne, Rainsville, and on a normal day-to-day basis, Henniger is the third largest city. But then, again, when you and Henniger has a normal resident population of about 3,000, but again, when you add those campers in the summertime from May through August, suddenly we realize that Mentone is the third largest city in the county, which changes the dynamic of everything completely. Do we have the assets? Do we have the ability? Do we have the equipment and resources it would take to evacuate those kids if we had a hazardous material spill? Number two, if we had the resources to do it, where are we going to take them? And then we have to look at what is most likely, if we have a problem, we start looking at all of this stuff. And we say, if we had that and we had a propane explosion, what kind of injuries are we looking at? And is our hospital capable of handling that type of injury? And so, and of course the answer to that is we don't have a burn center in Fort Payne. That means that we're going somewhere else. And so then that brings transportation into it. And there again, you start looking at all those things that overlap backwards on each other, and we suddenly realize it involves the whole community at large. And that's why that we have to get this message out. So some of the recommendations that came out of this study, one is further consideration of Tier 2 transportation analysis. So that's one thing we found is we're going to have to look deeper into it. One thing that we did find out, and of course we've talked about this before, and I have failed miserably at my attempt, is to get more industrial involvement in this committee, in the, and when I say Tier 2, everybody know what I'm talking about? Sarah Title III, an EPA Act from the 70s, created the Public Right to Know Act. In other words, this information, the report you've got in your hand, is public information. That's why we have this meeting. This is your opportunity to come and see and ask questions and have input as to what's actually going on in your community. Those reports have to be made public. So when you wind up with big, heavy industry, they are required by law to tell us what they have stored at their facility. So in other words, I can go down and look in my little drawer and I can tell you what GH Metals has, floating around on their floor that they're dumping out into the creek behind the shed.
Don't care to go to jail, so I'm not doing that.
We're not doing that today. But now, another recommendation was to consider evaluation of equipment placement. Some of this stuff requires really delicate handling, and right now we don't have a hazmat team in DeKalb County. The closest hazmat team to us is Huntsville. And so we have to either call the hazmat team from Huntsville, Birmingham, or Chattanooga. Keep that in mind. And you say, oh, well, we can fix that. We can just let the fire department do that. It's not hardly that simple. Again, I love volunteer firefighters, but they don't have time for the training that it requires. We do have a few specialized hazardous material folks who deal in their particular hazardous material. I know Ms. Osborne is here. For example, at the chicken plant in Collinsville, they have done their own internal hazardous material training so that they're trained to handle the situation internally should something bad happen, primarily with their ammonia refrigeration system. But the problem of it is what if it's not ammonia? What if it is sulfuric acid? Or what if it is hydrochloric key dead? It doesn't matter what the math is. What matters is we don't have the capability, to handle it. Which means we need to evaluate our training and our placement. Everything's forward to evaluate the effectiveness of designated hazardous material routes. And so that's where we're going to come in and begin to have more and more discussions, such as, one of the recommendations is to consider rerouting the hazardous materials that come through Fort Payne, actually through downtown Fort Payne. One of the consultant's recommendations is that we consider taking hazardous material traffic off of Galt Avenue and run it down Godfrey. It'd be real simple to get out of the most populous part of town, and that might be a consideration that we could use to mitigate some of these problems. Also, one of the recommendations was training exercise with our neighbors. Everything that we face is also faced by Dade County, Georgia, and Etowah County. So we're all kind of rolling in that same boat together. Now, as far as, and I hope that kind of explains to you what we've done and why we're doing this and what we hope to accomplish out of it in the long run. So we want to take the hazardous materials flow study, now that we know the mean, nasty stuff that's coming through the county. Next thing is, what are we going to do about it? We have to make some plans. And I will be honest with you, and I'll tell you up front, the answer to that question is run. Seriously, I mean, that is my only answer. Because we do not have the resources, the training, nor capability to handle a major hazardous material spill in DeKalb County. Now that bothers me. That bothers me a lot. And again, you're, and I understand this kind of stuff bothers you. But now keep in mind, this is where I go to bed every night. Okay? This is what I sleep with every night, is understanding that this stuff comes through our town, through our county, up and down our state roads every day, every week, every month in the county. And all it takes is one slip, and suddenly bad things happen. Now that don't include tornadoes, ice storms, droughts, floods. What else we had the last 3 months?
Fire.
And fires, yeah. I mean, you think about it, in November, week before Thanksgiving, we had 4,000 acres on fire. Week after Thanksgiving, we had a F3 tornado. 2 weeks later, well, during that, we almost had a flood to go along with it. That's what finally put out the fires. Then we had a snowstorm 2 weeks ago. I mean, this is all we need is to have some tear spill and we get our own Bible chapter. But we got to think about what this means for us as a community. We got to think about that sticking our head in the sand does not do away with the risk. That's what we do. That's what you have in your hand. That's why you are sitting here. This room represents the protection for 70,000 residents of this county. Okay, and it's up to us to decide as a community what we're going to do about this. Because I will tell you right now, okay, my plan for me and my family is run. Okay, when this happens, I quit. Y'all have a nice day. I am going to get my kids and we are going yonder somewhere. Because we don't have a good plan. We don't have capabilities. We don't have resources in place to handle something like that. So we, in the coming years, hope to find ways to, number one, mitigate some of our problem, and two, ways to respond to, and if need be, recover from, the bad things that happen. Now, with that said, are there any questions about the hazardous material commodity flow study?
We have a good notification system to tell everybody else to run.
Huh?
It's not just you and your family.
I'm not telling anybody. I'm just going, if you see me going.
That's the first step to everybody to run.
Yeah.
The next step is going to be somebody.
Before you run, will you tell us which way the wind's blowing?
Well, that's the thing. Let's hurry up.
Are the trucks carrying hazardous materials, are they supposed to be restricted to state highways and federal highways as far as where they go?
Not to my knowledge, sir.
That's why I thought I.
Well,
Come across the top of that.
Well, there is one exception, that's radioactive. Yes, radioactive is. We are a WIP county, and that is not mentioned in this report because this is a public report and everybody don't necessarily need to know that. I mean, yes, it's public information, and y'all know what WIP is. I've told you that before. Waste Isolation Pilot Project, okay? There is a place in Carlsbad, New Mexico, that's a former salt mine. It's 2,500 feet deep, and it's where all of the nuclear waste in this country is stored. It travels certain routes. All of the nuclear waste from the eastern seaboard comes down I-59. Okay? So in the middle of the night, when you see black SUVs and trucks with big lead containers on them, that's what that is. You've seen it. Okay? We get all the waste coming through our county from little places like Oak Ridge National Laboratory. You know what they do at Oak Ridge? They make nuclear weapons. Savannah River National Laboratories in Savannah. Sequoia, 3 Mile Island, all the nuclear plants up and down the eastern seaboard all come right down I-59. And it goes all the way to Carlsbad, and that's where it's put down into those salt mines where it'll remain till the rapture. That's what they do with it. And again, you take one of those wrecks and really bad things could happen in DeKalb County. So think about that. Other questions about the study? Well, it's going to make for some light reading when you get home. It's interesting to understand it. If you want to see any of the raw data like this, I'd be more than happy to share it with you. We don't, again, that's what Sarah Title III does from the EPA, is it gives the public, all of the public, the right to know. You know, one of the problems, however, is that the more people who know, the more people who seek to do us harm know. So, you know, it's not necessarily something we want to rush right out there and discuss. But, again, the public has the right to know, and you're welcome to see anybody's Tier 2 report. The other question that we have had with this committee before, and it's not one because we've really gone out and tried to actively recruit more industry to come in, is the fact that I don't believe we are having accurate reporting. I don't exactly believe that everybody's following the rules. And what I mean by that is the way it works is when we say a Tier 2 report, Tier 2 is the second tier of chemicals that requires being reported to the local government to let the community know what's being stored in their community. The problem with that is that we've got a lot of small business that don't understand that what they have should be reported. Okay, we're talking about stuff like, even right down to, there are farmers, just individual farmers in this county who store enough fertilizer and enough diesel fuel that they have to report it to us. And they're not doing so because they don't know they're supposed to. We've got small industry that used to be little bitty industry. Well, one of the, GH Metals is a good example of that. Were you there before they had to report, when they were still small enough weren't storing enough? But you know what I'm saying, you take a little bitty business that starts out real small and they begin to use this stuff in these quantities, and as they grow, they don't realize that they have now exceeded the limit, you know, that they have to report. And of course, there are those out there who just ignore the law, and that's the way it is. That's up to this committee. We need to decide how to go after that. We have sought, again, we've got 2 or 3 that are very active and help us tremendously, and then we've got some that just don't have a clue in the world as to what we're talking about when we start talking about reporting of these chemicals being stored at their facility. I don't know what to do about that. Now, so any other questions about this report? Because we do have, and that's part of this committee, we do have a reportable offense in the last 6 months. That's something else that this committee does, is I have to report to you when bad things have happened in our community. And that the bad thing that has happened is we have somehow managed to misplace 40,000 gallons of gasoline. In Fort Payne. Middle of town, if you'll notice, down close to Mr. Kirkendall's office, they've been doing work at the gas station down there with the car wash, used to be the old Shell station. We have managed to lose 40,000 gallons of gas and don't know where it's at. We have retrieved about 10,000 of that, so there's about 30,000 gallons still missing. And we really don't know where it's going. We don't know if it's going in the sewer system, which it very well could have, because that sounds like a lot of gas, but if you put it in little bitty increments and you spread it out over time and you run it through, you know, the sewage system here in Fort Payne runs about 1 million gallons a day, and so if you poured it in, you know, a few gallons at a time over a period of time, it would never be picked up. So it could have very well went into the storm drain system and been processed right out the other end. That's option 1. Option 2 is, this is all porous limestone. There could be a cave sitting somewhere that's full of gasoline, somewhere way down in the ground. They had to drill 70 feet, I believe, was the minimum, the minimum that EPA requires. They drilled 70 feet and we hadn't found it. So it's deeper than 70 feet if it's there. Option 3, it could have been run off to somewhere else we just hadn't discovered yet. It could be at 30 feet in a pocket somewhere. We just don't know where it's at. But the problem of it is that is out there. And the reason I really want to bring this up to you is this is a really good example of playing by the rules, okay? These folks, this incident, and you say, oh my gosh, EPA is going to eat these people alive. All right? I mean, that's the first thought. You don't even have to have insurance.
Well, they got it.
They got it. But what they did is they played by the rules, and they reported to the Alabama Department of Environmental Management through these Tier 2 reports, just like what we're talking about. They did all their reporting just like they were supposed to. And so the cost of this recovery is being covered by the Alabama Environmental Trust Fund. Okay, in Alabama, we have a trust fund that's just for that. And as long as you play by the rules, as long as you do what you're supposed to do when you're supposed to do it, and you report your amounts like you're supposed to, and you do your inspections like you're supposed to, everything's good. When they realized there was a problem, they self-reported. They called ADM. We didn't. ADM called us and told us about it. They self-reported. They came up here. They investigated. They found the problem. And now, Alabama Department of Environmental Management is mitigating the issue, and they're paying for it. So it's not costing that business owner anything other than loss of business. Now, imagine trying to recover 40,000 gallons of gas out of your pocket or out of your insurance company. That just wouldn't happen. We do have a couple of Superfund sites here in the county, but I mean, bad things can happen when you don't play by the rules. And a good example of that is Cleveland County. 2 years ago, the Cleveland County Commission got popped by ADM for about $4 million. The county commission, county government, state government popped the county for about $4 million because they had exactly the same thing happen. Well, and what happened up here is apparently there was a coupling loose between the tank and the pump. And so in that coupling, that's where the product leaked out. Cleveland County had the same thing happen at the county road department, but because they didn't report their quantities, they didn't have their tanks inspected like they were supposed to, when the ADM inspector walked up and found it, they popped them for $4 million. So don't think government's immune. And what I mean by that is, for those of you who have storage facilities in your town, city, county, whatever, make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, that your tanks are properly inspected, and that you're meeting all the guidelines that you're supposed to. And again, it's a whole lot of bureaucracy, but it will save you in the long run. And so, yes, sir.
So what you're saying is we've discovered the leak, they know how the product escaped. What was the time frame from the reporting time to the reporting time that this
Unknown.
escaped?
He began to notice difficulty. He went through, from what I understand, he went through a couple of employees because he thought that they were stealing gas. We had a problem because the amount they were putting in the ground and the amount they were getting paid for was two different amounts. And so this took a period of months to even discover there was a problem. And then, of course, he began to track it over a period of time, and then he took that time and multiplied it out to try to figure out how much there was. And so there's not really a way that we know the exact number of how many gallons over what period of time. And I don't know what the final, again, I don't know that ADM has made that ruling yet as to what kind of time period we're talking about.
What's the reporting requirement then? You only report when you discover a problem, or is there, you're talking about a hazardous material, gasoline, that you keep mass quantities, at a gas station and in-ground tanks. How often are they required to report to the government agency, this is what we've kept on hand, and this is, by the way, what we can't locate in the past quarter?
Well, that's one of the interesting things about the rule. again, this is government bureaucracy at its best. Because you don't report what you have, you report what you have. So in April, it's March the 31st? March 1st. March 1st, industry has to send us that Tier 2 report, and that indicates how many pounds of each chemical was stored over the last year as an average.
So it's an annual report.
And so it's an annual report. Now, if there is a spill, spills have to be notified within 24 hours. Is that right, Larry? 24? Reportable spill. And of course, there again, there's a lot of question goes into what is a reportable spill. Each chemical, you know, what we use as a general guideline, when we go out, we are charged with, at EMA, we are that local branch of EPA. So we have to go out on every hazardous material spill to look and say, is this reportable or is it not? When we say reportable, we mean reportable to EPA. Now, the usual rule of thumb that we use is 30 gallons or less. If it's less than 30 gallons, I ain't worried about it. It would cost more to dig up that dirt and do the testing and all that than it's worth. You know, that's just
Risk assessment.
yeah, that's just. However, though, there are chemicals out there to where it's a pound, pound and a half that are reportable quantities, not lost quantities, but you know, I mean, you have to report if you keep that much, and if you lose that much, you got real problems. And I can't remember the exact names of them, but there's some really mean, nasty chemicals, and as you can see from the list. When you start looking at all of these list names, and you know, xylenes, isobutanes, the acids, the alcohols, you know, we might think that that's bad stuff, but there's a lot of stuff that you see out there that you realize that is reactive with water. You know, the deal is the fire department gets there and sprays water on it, that's when it explodes. Or air, it interacts with air and suddenly it becomes flammable because of the presence of oxygen. Those are the chemicals that you really have to worry about. And there again, you go back and you talk about things like radioactive stuff. You know, we're a whip county and all that stuff. If you really want to get worried, okay, worry about UPS. You know, cobalt-60. You know what that is? Cobalt-60 is a radioactive element that we use in gamma knives at the hospital, a gamma knife that's used for cancer. That stuff is transported by UPS and FedEx every day. And all you have to do is go to the farmer's house, get a little bit of ammonium nitrate, a little bit of fuel, diesel fuel, mix it up with a handful of cobalt-60, and we now have a dirty bomb that will not necessarily kill a whole bunch of folks, but I can wreak a whole bunch of havoc. You know, I can make it dirty for a long time and really spread some terror through the community. And I ain't a rocket scientist like some of y'all are. Yes, sir.
Do we have an active poison disposal system in this county whereby people that know that they have highly dangerous poisons can dispose of them properly?
No.
So, for example, less than 20 years ago, any farmer, anyone could lay their hands on a pound of parathon. There's absolutely nothing more devastating than parathon. You make the worst dirty bomb you've ever seen out of a pound of parathon. What you just described, and I know for sure that there's people who have small orchards, commercial orchards that have this stuff. It was outlawed, no longer made. Well, they can't get rid of it, they're sitting on it.
And that is one of the problems. It is a big problem. And the thing that is, if you went, I mean, places like, okay, you carry this stuff to the landfill, places like Republic and Allied and those guys who do commercial removal will do it for you. Did they charge you to remove the mercury? Did we ever get that settled?
Well, there was cyanide, mercury, you know, we had everything. It was $28,000.
For, the deal is at the high school, in the chemistry lab, we had old chemicals we wanted to get rid of. One of which was cyanide mercury. Yeah, they'll come get it, and we're talking about a handful of stuff here. We ain't talking about 55-gallon drums of it. We're talking about little tiny quantities. And Mr. Cunningham called me with the same question of, what do I do with this? And of course, I told him to go throw it in the creek. But, did he listen to me? No. But, it's a joke. Okay?
The RUN program.
Yeah, BURN program, yeah.
Some way to address what I just brought up in this, because I mean, I've been around a day or two, and I know folks that have, they're being conscientious and keeping this stuff safe. But they don't want it, you know, but they also, you know, they're not gonna, they can't pay 10 grand to get rid of phenylparathon or some of these other lithium, this kind of stuff. I mean, it's a problem and it needs to be addressed because it affects all of us at some point.
And again, this is the committee. It is you who will decide that. And if that's what a project that you want us to undertake, we will undertake that, and we will work with EPA, and we will work with ADM, and we will find a solution. And there again, it's like, it's kind of like anything else, okay? And that is one of the problems of doing these kind of reports, okay? You can no longer say, I didn't know. You no longer have plausible deniability, okay? This is public record. And once we open that Pandora's box, once we realize, once we admit, hey, we know that there's stuff out in your barn that is mean and nasty. We know it's there, and we want to help you get rid of it. Once we undertake that as a community, we're going to have to follow through with it. And that's one of the dangers, is that once you know, once the genie is out of the bottle, you ain't putting him back. And you know, and that's the reason, again, I work for you. You got to understand that. I'm happy to do the work, but you as a community have to decide what you want us to do to mitigate these issues. And that's why we have these kind of meetings. And so out of this discussion will come, at the July meeting, a recommendation of what you want me to do with that. So we've got 6 months to come up with a plan as to what we want to do, and then we will implement from there. Does that make sense? Okay? You know, that way we can look at the scope of the problem, we can do a little research, we can find out what's out there, we can find out who we can get to mitigate some of these problems. Because there again, you start looking around, and there's really mean, nasty stuff out there that you don't even think about.
There's any type of grant funding that would be available to assist in that?
There could be, there's all kinds of stuff floating out there with EPA. However, with the, how do I say it? The current political environment, I see EPA funding not being a top priority. And I don't mean that to be ugly. I see there's going to be some changes in EPA, is what I'm saying, based on the political climate. However, with that said, what we could see is a lot more, rather than going into enforcement on the front end and making problems hard for everybody, we could actually see the EPA turn around and become what we believe it should be, and that's to help us with these very kind of problems. So with that said, yes, you know, there are some, like Superfund money. The Superfund Act is out there. Everybody know what Superfund money is? It came after Love Canal and some of those big, huge, Anniston became a Superfund site with the PCBs. And what it is where the EPA comes in and they actually do the cleanup. It is just too big for the community to handle on their own. And so they come in and do the cleanup. And like I say, right now here in DeKalb County, I only know of one Superfund site that we have, and that's the one at Sylvania. But yes, ma'am, I think we could. I mean, we can at least apply. So yes, I mean, we can look into that. And again, I'll be happy to report back to you in July as to what those findings are. Yes, sir.
Do you know the facility assets and where they might be located, either in the state or nationally, where some of these types of nasty things can be eradicated, can be distilled, can be whatever?
A lot of it depends on what it is. You know, for example, in the state of Alabama, a lot of people don't realize this, in the state of Alabama, we have a number of hazardous material disposal sites because of the big clay pits down in South Alabama. It's clay, it's so dense that nothing can get out of it. So they take this hazardous materials and put it down in these clay pits, cover it up, and build playgrounds on top of it.
Email, hazardous waste, this is probably closed by now, isn't it?
I think it is. I hadn't heard of it in a lot of years.
They used to haul it all over the country for that.
So if you're familiar with these assets, then it's a matter of assessment. You've already done the assessment and continue to do further assessment about what nasty stuff is in our midst, and then what we can do with it, and then come up with an action plan, how to get it from point A to point B,
Right.
and what kind of resource it takes to get that.
The place don't take care of the cost.
Yes, sir. And that's the thing is, and there again, sometimes, I mean, you say, well, it's cost prohibitive, but when it comes to the environment, we don't care. Well, it's not that we don't care, it's that do we have the resources to mitigate it at this time? Because, I mean, I can remember when I was a kid, the dye branch would run green one day and red the next day. I mean, can you imagine that happening today? I mean, we'd have the EPA camped out down here over red sock dye.
That's how it got its name.
That's how it got its name, you know? But, well, you know, it's, like I say, it's not a matter of if we have the resources, I mean, it can happen, but there again, part of the problem is this is something that we have not looked at a whole lot before. You know, Mr. Cunningham happened to look at the high school, but I don't want to go look at the county high school. You know, I have not put that one on my plate, and, you know, just, again, I'd rather not know.
Just don't go in the science lab.
Yeah, exactly.
Principal's obsolete.
And you know, because, and you say that, you know, but that's the truth. It's just not something that has been, you know, a pressing priority. And again, that's the other thing that I'm trying to do with this committee is to build more support and more education and get this committee more active in the community so that it's not just me worried about it. So that, I mean, I realize it's my job and I'll do it and all that kind of stuff. But again, I don't want to be the one that cost the school system $100,000 to get rid of 2 bottles of mercury. You know, when I was a kid, we used to play with mercury. It was, I mean, take it out and it's put it on a rock, throw it in the brain.
It's several pounds of mercury. But we had it in a safe place. It was in an old chemistry lab. It was locked up. But who can say that the lock's going to hold up? But I must tell you this, if you go to this extent, have it removed, the companies that do it are unbelievably thorough, and you'll think it's the worst stuff in the world. I mean, they're dressed head to toe. White, looks like moon being walking in. And I mean that they're so thorough at what they've got. And you have to be thorough at what, you first have to have a whole list of what you have. They back it up. And then they provide you with documentation showing where they're carrying it and that you were not liable for that material anymore. That's what it is.
Very similar to asbestos. No.
Yeah.
It's asbestos squared. That's how serious these guys are unbelievably serious. But they have to be. Their place is really, really dangerous.
But these are the issues that we do have in the county, and again, I apologize, I have gone over my time limit for this meeting. But again, I appreciate your time, I appreciate your effort to be here. I'm sorry to be so long, but again, this is brand new, this is something we've never done before. This has never been done in the county before. This is the first time we've actually done this, so we have concrete evidence of exactly what we have and what it's doing and where it's at. And so now, again, that we know, we can begin the process of education and mitigation so that hopefully we won't have to deal with response and recovery. But again, that's up to you as a community. It's up to you to tell us how you want us to go as a community. In other words, I need your input as committee members, and I need your expertise in going out and talking to your neighbors and the people who do what you do to get them to come in to join us as a community meeting. And again, this is stuff that affects everybody in the county, and this is stuff that you can run from, but you can't hide from. And to use the excuse, I didn't know that, or I'm going to turn my head to that. That's not a plan.
Did I hear you say this could be the driver that gets an overpass or an underpass, and how soon?
Probably.
Several years. I mean, it took 5 years to get it done, and they paved a 3-mile stretch of road.
Well, the thing about it is there's some federal railroad money out there, and that's part of, railroads fall under a whole different, there's a federal railroad, whatever you call it. And it's their one and only reason for being is to help mitigate the kind of problems we have in Fort Payne. And what they will do is if we show them we have a problem and we want to fix it and we want to help fix it, but we just can't afford it, there are taxes that are put on all of these hazardous materials and on the railroad itself that goes into this fund to help us pay for things like viaducts and sidetrack protectors and gate crossings, and that's where all this stuff gets paid for from. There again, it will take some local money, it'll take some state money, but I believe if we can get with the right documentation in place and the right politics, if you will, we would stand a real good chance, because we literally, there is no crossing between Collinsville and Valley Head.
When I said 10 years, I was not being facetious. I mean,
No, 10 years is a good figure. I mean, if we can do it in 10 years, I'll be a happy camper.
It may be less, but the biggest thing you get into is the viaduct itself won't solve the problem. You still have to have means to reroute the traffic to that to keep it out of the areas. We should talk about extensive, probably 35, all of this sort of time together, which takes a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot, that's a heavy lift to make, because there again, most likely the only way we're going to get it is to turn 35 into a corridor project, which will completely bypass town one way or the other, because that's about all the state's going to fund like that, is a corridor project. And there again, we're talking about upsetting, I don't know how well the city fathers are going to want to bypass the town. That's something that has to be considered. But there again, a lot of this stuff will be tied to that federal money that'll tell us what we can and can't do and what we must and must not do. And there again, we may decide as a community, nah, we're good. We'll just stay where we're at. We'll make do the way we're going to make do. Again, I have no problem with that. That's what the community decides, and so be it. But, we don't want to just say it's impossible. I mean, that's what everybody has said for years and years and years, is it's impossible. We cannot get this done. Well, it may not be possible today, but that don't mean it's not impossible 10 years from today, or, my Lord, who ever thought we'd have, Walmart in Fort Payne? I mean, just,
Or a third exit.
or a third exit, yeah. I mean, well, seriously, who would ever thought we'd have had, fiber, Farmer's Telephone, or we'd have had city water, in Antioch? I mean, who'd have thunk it? Literally 10 years ago, those things were just pipe dreams. Just, you're crazy, you're a nut, it'll never happen. Yeah. But anyway, again, I apologize for keeping you so long. Anybody got any other questions?
I came down here before Christmas and talked with Mr. Crow, and I think that's the reason I got the call to come today. We live in the High Point community, and Of course, well, of course, we have tornadoes all through the county, but that's a very high area for risk in our community. We have no shelters. And we own some property on Highway 85, and I talked to Mr. Hartcrow about maybe us donating some property. And I know I've got online and looked at Lowe's and a lot of places like that that have community grants, and he advised me to talk to you and see what we could do to get the wheels rolling, or if it's a possibility, or if it just isn't. You know.
No, it always is. And that's the thing, is what it takes is community action, okay? The county, as the county, we don't have enough of a tax base in this county to do a whole lot of mitigation projects. That's just the facts of life. We've not had an ad valorem tax increase here to general fund since the 50s, as far as I know. So that means our tax base, we are running a budget for 2017 based on income from 1950, as far as general fund is concerned. That's one of our issues, and that's something that's not going to change, and we're not going to fix it. So what we have to have is community support. Now, the way the shelter program works, if you want a community shelter, what you would do is, and again, it depends on how big and how many people and who all you want to shelter. You know, my best piece of advice is to get everybody in the High Point community together, call us, we'll come out, we will meet with you and tell you what the process is. But we get this question a lot, particularly about tornadoes. You know, we had enough money, we had $28,000 that came from the flooding Christmas of 15. We had $28,000 in grant money. We were going to use that money to build a shelter at Ider. They had put in like 2009 for a shelter. But by the time we got done reviewing the project, looking at the land, the city of Ider could not come up with enough match money, okay, because no grant money is ever going to be 100%.
Well,
It's going to be a percentage, and usually it's 75 to 85%. So, for example, if you're going to build a 100-person shelter, it's going to cost you about $100,000. So that means that the community's going to have to come up with $20,000 to $25,000 in real money to get that project done. And that's assuming we have grant money to do the rest. That project will take, you know, if we wanted to put it, you know, if we committed today and said, yes, we're going to do a project, it would probably take us 10 years of application and waiting until the money got right before we could get it. Do you know how long Geraldine did? Well, I know the application went in like 07 and it wasn't installed till like 11. Is that right? We're going to count 12. Yeah, it was installed in 12. So it took 5 years from the time Geraldine committed to the project until the shelter was set. It took 5 years. And that's for a town that had committed cash money. And so, well, for example, I'll give you another example. The community of Kilpatrick, south end of the county, got hit in 13. They said, we want to build a community storm shelter. We said, fine. We started working on the project. And they have basically given up just because it just takes so much to get it done. But there again, is it impossible? Absolutely not. I mean, you look at, you know, there are places that have private shelters. Look at the Heyman homes out at Powell, where they have the handicap systems. They built their own 100-person shelter out of their pocket. They just built it. Boom, boom. And so it's all in who we get involved and how much they're willing, you know, work we're willing to do, and it's really up to the community. And that's the way it goes with all the communities all across the county. I don't care. I'll work on the project, and we'll put every resource the county has behind it. You know, we could do the stuff that we can do, things like grade work and dirt moving. You know, Ben can help us with stuff like that. That we can do, what we're happy to do. But just, I mean, the problem is it all goes back to funding. And again, and I got to warn you about this, is This is one of those situations of be very, very careful of what you ask for, you might get it. Because General Kelly, the new Director of Homeland Security, is a Marine. And you gotta remember that. And you say, what does that have to do with price tea and China? Well, Marines do two things. They break stuff and kill people. That's what they do. That's all they do. And they do it in a neat, proficient military manner. And what I mean by that is I believe General Kelly's focus is going to be on Homeland Security. I believe that building a wall and building up police and doing those kind of things are going to be at the top of the project list for Homeland Security, which FEMA falls under. What I mean by that is, if there's going to be grant money given away, I don't think General Kelly is going to be real high up on the list of giving money away for storm shelter. That is just the political reality of things. Do I know this? Listen, I don't. Because there again, I thought the last administration would be far more liberal about giving out grant funding for things like shelters, and they were not. So it's going to depend on a whole lot of stuff, and a whole lot of stuff we don't know right now. So, and I'm sorry, that's not a good answer, but that's the best one I can give, and it's as honest as I can give. Other questions? Comments, complaints? If so, see me about it. We will have our next meeting third Thursday in July. Good Lord willing. Same time, same place.
Tornado. Oh, I was about to say.